Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Sustainable Development Policy Institute, I welcome the Honorable Chair, Mr. Sartaj Aziz, distinguished speakers, Dr. Shaheen Sardar Ali, Mr. Parvez Iftikhar, Dr. Faisal Shaheen, and Dr. Adeela Rehman. I also welcome the respected participants who are joining us online. And thank you for joining SDPI in its annual conference which is titled Sustainable Development in the Times of COVID-19. The subject under discussion in this panel is an overwhelming role of ICTs during COVID-19 era and beyond. By now, we all know that with its mass destruction and economic rout, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about technological transformation in every walk of life. Technology has never been used before at such a massive scale to keep people engaged and updated on the hovering threats of such a pandemic. Information and communication technologies have positively impacted healthcare, education, commerce, and governance systems. The future role of ICTs will be even more crucial in every sphere. The speakers will be discussing various aspects of this vital subject. Let me now introduce the chair and the speakers. Mr. Sartaj Aziz needs no introduction, but briefly, he was the first Vice Chancellor of Beacon House National University, Lahore. He is the former advisor to the Prime Minister on National Security and Foreign Affairs. He is a former Minister of Finance. He was the Deputy Chairman, Ministry of Planning, Development and Reforms. He is a former Chairman, Food and Agriculture Organization. A significant phase of his life, his early life, as a student was his role in the Pakistan movement as a member of the Executive Committee of Muslim Students Federation at Islamia College, Lahore from 1944 to 1946. He has the distinction of receiving a prize from the Quaid-e-Azam at the annual convocation of Islamia College, Lahore in 1946. He is the author of 8 books and publications. His recent book, Between Dreams and Realities, is an impressive analysis of the milestones and turning points in Pakistan's political history, and that our salvation lies in true democratic dispensation. The first speaker, Dr. Shaheen Sardar Ali, is Rector, National Academy of Higher Education. She has been on the faculty of universities of Peshawar, Warwick, and Oslo. She was Vice Chair of the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. She was a Minister for Health, Population Welfare, and Women Development in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. She was the chair of Pakistan's first National Commission on the Status of Women from 1999 to 2001. In 2012, she was named one of the 100 most influential women of Pakistan. She has extensively published in Islamic law, international human rights law. She is the author of 9 books, 41 journal articles, and 30 book chapters. Her recent monograph, Modern Challenges to Islamic Law, is an important contribution to Islamic law. She will be speaking on learning by doing, some reflections on National Academy of Higher Education and Higher Education Commission's responses to the COVID-19 pandemic in higher education. Second speaker, Mr. Parvez Iftikhar is an information and communication technology consultant advising governments and regulators in Asia and Africa, 14 countries so far, on behalf of the World Bank and International Telecommunication Union. He is a member of Prime Minister's Task Force on Information Technology and Telecommunications and of various other committees. He is a former chief executive of Universal Service Fund and telecom country head Siemens in Pakistan. He will be speaking on opportunities and challenges for Pakistan and overwhelming role of ICTs during COVID-19 era and beyond. The next speaker, Dr. Faisal Shaheen, is a senior lecturer in the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the Ryerson University, Canada. He also serves as a manager of enterprise solutions at the City of Toronto's Water Division. At one time, he was a researcher in SDPI. He will be discussing the success factors of implementing information and communication technology in large organizations in response to pandemic management operation. The last speaker, Dr. Adeela Rehman, is Assistant Professor, Fatma Jinnah Women University. She heads Department of Sociology. She is an active researcher and a reviewer of a number of journals. She is a member of various national and international organizations. She will be speaking on COVID-19 era and beyond, experience of students towards prospects and challenges of information and communication technologies in online learning. Ladies and gentlemen, we have less than 90 minutes for this session. We have to complete this session in time, otherwise we will be forcefully removed from the scene by the IT team. I would request the audience to please hold your questions till all speakers have spoken, or you can place your questions in the chat box. The session will be recorded, and you can get the recording anytime on request whenever you like, and you can share that with anybody you like. It is also being telecast live on Facebook. Before I invite the first speaker, may I now request the chair for his opening remarks, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Very impressive panel, and I am very happy to be a part of this group, because this is a challenge that we all regard as one of the most important challenges in the post-COVID world. I think the changes, the far-reaching changes that the post-COVID world will see are difficult to anticipate, but there's absolutely no doubt that in all the changes, ICT will continue to play a very major role. And how we face these challenges is an important one. And therefore, once the panel has spoken, I'll make some recommendations for the consideration of the panel and for inclusion in the final report. So may I now invite the first speaker, which is Dr. Shaheen Sardar to make her presentation.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Chair and members of the organizing committee, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, greetings and warm wishes from the National Academy for Higher Education. I'm indeed very honored at the privilege of participating in this important international conference, and thank the organizers for the opportunity of sharing some experiences from work that we undertook at NAHI as we responded to the COVID-19 pandemic in the higher education sector. The National Academy of Higher Education, presently a division of the HEC, is a specialist institution for undertaking capacity building in teaching excellence, research, and academic governance. So as such, our remit and scope extends to the entire higher education sector in Pakistan. Now, an urgent challenge that we confronted at NAHI since March 2020, when the COVID-19 crisis led to a lockdown, was to devise interventions for addressing this crisis. An unintended consequence of this crisis led to the search for urgent and innovative ICT solutions, some already in existence, although peripheral, and others brand new, with a particular focus on online education and e-learning. So my paper is going to reflect upon the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on deeper, sudden engagement with ICT. In fact, as the title of the panel says, the overwhelming ICT engagement that we have had to have and we have had to respond to. So HEC had to develop COVID-19 guidance policy notes for the entire higher education sector, and NAHI, as the lead and the premier institution of capacity building in the country, we had to actually learn by doing. And that is why I've called the title of my paper Doing by Learning. So on fully online faculty development programs had to be simply transformed at the drop of a hat, as they say in English. And so that was a real huge challenge for us. However, I would say that on the positive aspects, I argue that in addition to substantive content on teaching and learning, research and academic governance, the transformation to online delivery of the program forced new skills and competencies upon the participants and upon all constituencies. So these included familiarity and learning and using the learning management system, or LMS as we call it, such as Moodle, the teaching and learning on MS Teams and Zoom, as you and I are all engaged in right now, netiquette, as in how we actually work and engage with each other on the internet and online mode, as well as collaborative online reading and writing skills. On the challenging aspects, however, we noticed that women with caring responsibilities who were working from home and who were part of our faculty development programs, they were confronted with a lot of double and I would say triple burden, as they were forced to work from home with young children, attend to their daily needs, facilitate their children's online learning as well as their own, and engage in household chores as well. So women employees nationally, and dare I say internationally, had to work through these unforeseen pressures and constraints, sometimes with very little support. So the paper therefore also seeks to highlight these gaps and lack of a coherent policy of addressing a highly gendered workplace scenario under the work from home policy. Finally, I also want to put on the table the issue of how the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the gap between those with access to the internet and electricity and electronic gadgets and those deprived of it. And so almost like when we thought that the internet was an equalizer, COVID-19 also raised the fact that it was discriminatory and that it was adding to the discrimination and gap between the haves and the have-nots of society, not only in Pakistan, but internationally. So what I would like to say is, in terms of how we have tried to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic at NAHI and the HEC, I would like to bring to your attention the fact that face-to-face education, where the teacher and the taught coexisted in shared space, physical spaces, was considered, quote unquote, the normal. And so with COVID-19 as the new normal, where we could not be in face-to-face physical spaces, That is what I believe was the greatest challenge and continues to be the greatest challenge. So it places significant stresses on our lives because as human beings and creatures of habit, where we want to interact with each other physically, trying to work on in a screen, sometimes because of internet connectivity, sometimes without a face, this faceless, nameless interaction has put on a lot of strain, as we understand it, when we were trying to put our faculty development programs online. Most importantly, we had students from rural, far-flung areas continuously struggling to access the internet, as well as struggling to meet the increasing costs of procuring devices that would support them to work online. However, I would also argue that these challenges has brought opportunities. And so the biggest opportunity is the fact that we have almost been pushed willy-nilly into the 21st century, and much against some of our wills. I won't say everybody's will, but some of our wills. So and students, if you noticed in the higher education sector, were constantly up in arms and felt that they were getting quote unquote do number or second rate service. What many students in Pakistan unfortunately didn't understand was that their counterparts in the entire world were facing the similar problems. And that be it North and South, East and West, whatever we want to call it, developed country, developing country, many of us were in the same boat. So as members of the higher education community, the question I want to pose is how and why can we see the dark clouds of the COVID-19 as also a glimmer of hope? How can we seize the moment, and how did we at NAHI seize the moment? So here are a few reflections. I'm tempted to use the word calling our bluff. And I think that for a lot of the teaching community, the online mode called people's bluff, who for decades were reading out notes in class to their students and who really did not have any accountability. There was absolutely no way in which you can tell a teacher that is committed, that is contemporary, to one who was simply doing rote learning themselves and also facilitating that. And I suspect that these were the ones who were the most resistant to the change. Now I understand that fear of the unknown is also normal. So online teaching for those teachers, for those students who did not have an email, who had not really ever engaged with online teaching and learning, this was a big challenge. But what we've got to slowly and gradually understand and internalize that this indeed is the new normal, and that for the foreseeable future, there is no default position of going back to 100% face-to-face physical space of teaching and learning. So what I would like to share here then is the HEC's COVID-19 guidance policy notes that we at NAHI then took up and operationalized. The one that was the most important for the perspective of our panel today is the COVID-19 guidance number 5 on online readiness for higher education institutions. So this was issued to provide ways in which online readiness can be certified in all aspects of online teaching and learning. And in order to give an example of best practice, at NAHI, we went forward and offered ourselves to be certified for our Faculty Development Program 2020. So what this requires is, for example, institutional preparedness for online teaching, which means we need a live functional learning management system, student and faculty preparedness through training, communication, and information of tools that are available and accessible on the LMS. We wanted to tick a box where all the teachers and the taught could read their course, curriculum, assessment, everything online prior to the start of the program. Now, this actually is where the quality control and accountability came in. We also wanted to ask students and faculty whether they had access to the internet or not. Because there's no point in saying, come on, we've got a singing and dancing LMS, if I can't access it. Now, the reason for that pro forma when it came back was that those who did not have access to the internet and electricity, we offered them to be located into one of our regional centers where we could provide them with that facility. We also provided a high-level committee to be instituted, which was called the Online Academic Committee for Online Readiness, as well as a participant grievance committee, so that any student who was not pleased with the service they were getting, they could actually approach this high-level committee. Now, I believe that, and I'm arguing this, and of course only time will tell, but I argue that this policy guidance holds in its detail the transformative potential for enhancing the quality of higher education in Pakistan through the use of ICT. By insisting on online readiness components above, the policy is putting in place a process for ensuring benchmarks and quality indicators that will continue well beyond the COVID-19 situation. If we can achieve continuity of these processes, we have a fighting chance of taking the leap into competing with international standards. It is not only for online teaching that we must be in a state of online readiness. Lockdown or not, COVID or not, every university must take that leap into the 21st century by having a functional LMS with all the requisite information. Students must be given that information regarding their course content. Faculty must have the training and confidence to share their curriculum, and for students and peers in their institution without fear of losing authority and ownership of work. You see, this is very important, to give confidence to the faculty to say, it doesn't matter if you show up your course content and share it with anybody else. It doesn't mean you're going to lose authorship. It doesn't mean you're not going to be an authority on anymore. It is only natural that fear and trepidation lurks in many corners of personal and professional life. Anxiety of venturing into online teaching without having had either the training or the previous experience is normal. The present situation should make it equally normal to accept these shortcomings and to say that we will slowly and gradually make progress. But with this, I say, comes a positive silver lining to accept that we're in this together. The COVID-19 pandemic does not respect geographical borders, does not respect the rich and poor, the north and south. What it will respect, however, is how robustly, collegially, and courageously we move together towards a brighter future, accepting our new realities of work and life. Between April and October 2020, NAHI applied the COVID-19 policy guidance number 5 on its own faculty development program, and we trained over 500 faculty that are now working into different universities in Pakistan. I will end by saying that the trials and tribulations of the education sector are not divorced from the wider society. Fearful, lacking confidence, unsure of what may happen in fighting an invisible adversary is the common denominator that unites all of us as communities. But we also have shared aspirations, that of a healthier, happy, and a better post-COVID-19 world. The demand of students for quality education provides this very opportunity. Let us seize the moment and join in the perseverance of a better world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for such an animated presentation. Before calling on the next speaker, may I remind the speakers that we have a time limit of 10, maximum 12 minutes if you have to stay within the limits. So please observe this time. May I now call upon Mr. Parvez Iftikhar to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, SDPI, and thank you, Sartaj and Dr. Shaheen Sardar. I will carry your some of the things that you said further, and that was about the accessibility. Next, please. Accessibility of the internet. I know I'm conscious of the time. We have 12 minutes, but I will try to cover these 10 slides that I have within the time. Maybe I overshoot by a couple of minutes. I'll try not to. Next one. So where do we stand in the ICT world? Why do we have these problems where the connectivity is an issue? It is true that this is in most of the world not a very big connectivity is not very good. But if we look at our neighborhood and we take a few ICT related indices, we find that we have been left behind. We are behind every country in our region, except in one case Nepal and another case Myanmar. In every country and every index, we are left behind. Next. So what is the problem? IFC carried out a study, and the summary of their finding is, if you see those red flags, one is taxation, which of course is not the topic of this talk, but two of them relate to the access, fixed access. And fixed access these days means optic fiber cables. We can have another measure, next please, which shows us the number of mobile towers connected with optic fibers. Now, the quality of the broadband, mobile broadband, depends on the optic fiber connectivity or not. And Pakistan pathetically lags behind a few comparable countries. So what we have to address is the optic fiber cables connectivity in Pakistan. Next, please. Next. So next, the country can be divided into three main categories: the large cities, the small cities, and the villages. Next. In the large cities, the service providers are investing in infrastructure, in fiber infrastructure. In the smaller cities, next, they find it a bit challenging. I'll just in a minute come to what the challenges are. And in the villages, of course, we have a Universal Service Fund, which is using its funds to connect villages. It has enough to do for the next decade. USF cannot help the small cities. So the gaps that we have are next in the small cities, tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which are badly hit. Next. How it is done in Pakistan is that a service provider who has to provide service to the last customer, he does everything by himself. He has to get the right of way from the cities or from the highways or railways or whatever that is. He has to lay ducts. He has to pull the fibers through them. He has to bring internet capacity, and then he has to service customers. So when every service provider has to do that, that means a lot of duplication. And the capital expenditure naturally is very high because he has to do everything. So therefore, less and less service providers venture into this business. There is less competition, and the quality of broadband suffers, and also the smaller cities suffer. Next. So the main challenges are the capex is keep going, please. Capex is very high. Right of way is very costly and expensive. OPEX is a problem because fibers get cut very frequently. Demand is not very visible. Only now, by the way, COVID has made this demand visible, because otherwise people were very happy using their mobile and using their smartphones, downloading these small videos here and there and chatting, and they thought this is internet. But internet, of course, is much more. And only now COVID has told us that and people have come up with demand of better broadband because of online learning and things like that. Government does not cater for any specific initiatives to take broadband to schools or colleges or health institutions, or for governance. Next, please. And for the local government, of course, the priority is, next, please, only the bridges and culverts and roads and streets. So not internet. Next, please. So next. There are two kinds of models in the world where the infrastructure is provided, either by the service provider that we have in our country, as I mentioned earlier, or in infrastructure provider. So in the service provider, in the first one, there are three different ways. Either this every service provider does it, as in the previous slide I showed, or the incumbent service provider, which means the T&T department, what used to be, or what is now PTCL, they do it. BSNL in India does it, or BT in UK. But the problem in Pakistan is that PTCL is privatized. So when PTCL is privatized, so all other service providers have become its competitors. So obviously you don't share your assets with your competitors. This is a basic business rule. So therefore PTCL is not working. Or there is sometimes an association or consortium of service providers. But in Pakistan, it has been tried. It only, if somebody is left out of it, it is very difficult for him to get in. So it is not successful. And also it has remained in the big cities, not in smaller cities. The infrastructure provider model is where the infrastructure is either provided by a non-telco private provider like Google or Facebook. Please click. For example, in Africa, this is a map of Kampala in Uganda, where Google has provided metro fiber all over the town. So, and they have done it. Facebook also has done it in many other cities. But of course, that is only in Africa. And the other one model, which is shown here now, is the so-called STOCAB model. This is, of course, from Sweden, but there are many other countries where the infrastructure provider provides the right-of-way. He caters for the duct and the fibers, and the service provider only comes and rides on that infrastructure and provides service. So this is the model which I think we should adopt. Next. Instead of having this, what we have at this moment, where that one service provider does everything, we can have a, please click, an infrastructure provider which provides the passive elements or partly also active elements of the whole infrastructure. Which means if one service provider comes and says, I need only ducts and right of way, I will pull my own fibers, this infrastructure should be able to, provider should be able to provide that. Or next, if another smaller service provider says, I need your cables also, the cables can also be provided by this. Or if a very small service provider comes next, who says, I just need a fraction of your cable. I just don't need the whole of fiber. I need a fraction of that. I know I will provide my service on that. That should also be possible. So with this infrastructure provider, and this has to be just once in a city. It doesn't have to be like service providers model. It doesn't have to be multiple fiber cables in the city. Next, please. Of course, very large users like Safe City, for example, can also make use of this fiber network. Next, please. So the problem is not just, as I said, the model, the problem is funding. And because in the smaller cities, there is not much business. So we have to, in every small city, we have to fund at least one TIP or telecom infrastructure provider. How is that done? Please keep going. The government provides some loan or some fund and the TIP also raises some funds, and with that he gives to the private contractors who lay duct and fibers for him. Next, please. With these ducts and fibers, the TIP lends to service providers. Please go ahead. And these service providers provide service to their end customers. For the rent that is paid to the service provider, by the service provider to the telecom infrastructure provider, please go ahead. With this money, he of course makes his own profit, meets his operational costs, and also, please go ahead, pays back to the government. So this is a PPP-like model in which the funding is also made available to the telecom infrastructure provider, and it is done only, it has to be done, as I said, only once in every city, and no multiple diggings are required, no multiple cables are required, and service providers can come and start using next. So this, keep going please. This has got benefits for all the players. The local governments get their businesses, new jobs, the businesses created, multiple diggings are avoided. The digging is only once. Please go, keep going. Please keep going. Please keep going. Yeah. The federal government gets the digital economy working and prepare for the 5G. You know, there's no 5G without extensive fiber penetration. The service providers, you know, because it becomes easy for them because then they don't have to lay cables, especially the mobile providers, their broadband connectivity improves and their costs go down. The end user gets choice of SPs, service providers, the tariffs gets lowered, and because there are many of them riding on the same network now. Next, please. And of course, the new investors find it, the barriers are lowered because a new investor doesn't have to dig and put his own cable. He can use the same cable, pay rent, and start his business. So there will be more competition. And of course, Safe City, etc., can use the same cables. Next, please. So my last slide, there are some apprehensions, of course, and there are possible remedies too. One is that the state, if the state owns an infrastructure, it's a bad experience. So if the state is funding, state might like to own at least part of it. So, but if the private sector is allowed to own the infrastructure, then there's a danger of private monopoly. So the remedy is to have private ownership and with oversight of the state by the regulator. So the current service providers who have invested in cities, they may be apprehensive. Well, they have not invested in the small cities, so there are no apprehensions. Next, please. The infrastructure is in the control of the TIP, and if TIP starts is an unethical one and starts providing service, he becomes a competitor of his own customers. Of course, TIP license forbids that, but we may even have to strengthen the regulations even more. The service providers are used to owning infrastructure, and they are not, there's something new for them. Well, some pilot projects in different provinces can overcome this apprehension. And last but not least, government has no money. Where the funding or the loan will come from? Well, here we come to the opportunities and challenges that we talked about in the title. This opportunity, the COVID-19 has also given us an opportunity. And for example, I'm not selling any idea, but for example, World Bank has offered a soft credit post-19 for this purpose. I thank you very much. That was my presentation.
Very interesting and challenging presentation. I hope the task force will find the right solution and implement it very expeditiously. May I now call upon Dr. Faisal Shaheen, our third speaker, to make his presentation.
Thank you, Sartaj Sahab. Assalamu alaikum, everybody from Toronto, where the snow is falling. It's about 2 in the morning, and there's no place I'd rather be. I'd like to thank SDPI Brigadier Sahab Shahid Bhai and everyone for being here this afternoon or this morning, early morning here. And thank you, Mr. Parvez and Dr. Shaheen Sahiba for your illuminating presentations. I feel like I want to get back into my private sector frame of mind or even to academia, but I'm going to pick up on some of the threads that Mr. Parvez spoke about with regard to regulation and trust. And let me see if I can trust my screen right now and see if this actually works. Okay, can you see that, Sartaj Sahab?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so here I'm speaking from Toronto, and trust and confidence are two key themes which Dr. Shaheen Sahiba and my dear colleague Mr. Parvez spoke about, which I want to speak about now. Let's jump to the end. So what the space that I occupy within the city of Toronto when I'm not on vacation in Islamabad and spending time with my colleagues at SDPI is really within the municipal water utility sector. And as Dr. Shaheen mentioned, we have all been very much overwhelmed by COVID. This is unprecedented, and it has really taken a lot of our systems by storm, and it has pushed us from desktop pandemic planning into a very real, a very moving moment to moment and minute by minute existence where the expectations of the public have really surpassed what the system capabilities that we have on hand are capable of providing. So I'm going to provide a little bit of insight on how we manage municipal information systems, deploy them, and what benefit they have been to insofar as COVID-19 planning has been. I'm hoping that by the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about cultivating innovation, key insights and lessons learned, not just from the city of Toronto, which I focus on, and Ontario, but other municipalities in North America, leveraging ICT, which really means GIS. And for the students, I'd also like to make this point. ICT basically means mobile, and it means you're showing data in maps. We have a saying here in North America that many organizations are data rich, but knowledge poor. And we can't make decisions because the data is just so overwhelming. Then, as I've been asked to by Brigadier Saab and others, I'd want to shift to the policy environment and talk about what the different roles are between national, provincial, municipal, and the public realm. And Mr. Parvez talked about this very well, and he landed in this space. You really need a regulated environment to ensure that you have somewhat of a level playing field. And some of the takeaways speak to this. So what has the enterprise thinking and strategy been up and until now? Well, if you are in a city, what you want to do is make sure that service delivery is maintained and that your assets, whether they're fire hydrants, water, utility, parks, schools, are performing, and your resources and your staff are engaged and responding accordingly to demands. ICT in this regard increasingly now means mobile, map-based information and decision-making. The tool has to be easy to use, out of box, minimal configuration. Gone are the days of customizing solutions. And this way, the end user, the city worker, or even the member of the public actually wants to send information through their device to a call center or to a public service provider to identify an issue. Maybe it's a spill, maybe it's an accident, maybe it's an asset which is in need of repair, but the ICT technology is now central to how we engage the public. Now, technology strategy has really infused new public management thinking, which for those of the students who are here really means privatization of public services in the way of thinking, letting economic thinking drive a lot of the management of our public service organizations. But what that really means now is that we're not customizing software solutions as much. We're buying large enterprise solutions, commercial off-the-shelf technology, using out-of-box technology, which is really readily available, and not tinkering with it too much before we implement. This is sort of the trend right now. Government at the federal and provincial level, and even municipal, should be concerned primarily with data utility, making data open to the public, and then of course making sure that information is integrated. Now, project management, and I apologize to the students here and my colleagues, but each one of these slides you could build a lecture on for at least 3 hours. Enterprise project management, insofar as ICT is concerned, really needs to capture the following. And this is from across municipalities in North America. Requirements gathering that puts the end user in front. You cannot build solutions in a bubble. And unfortunately, the trend for the past 15 years was really technology people driving the show. Now you need to put business users front and center. Now, what that means is that as you map out your project timelines and you have your integrators and software developers involved, you need to look at the software providers, the IBMs, the Microsofts, Oracles, and then balance that with implementers. So your local practitioners, your local consultants. So people like Mr. Parvez, don't get IBM or a big solution provider to come in and then implement a solution for you in Pakistan. You get people who are knowledgeable of the local environment, in local integrators, local consultants who can actually take that out-of-box functionality and then implement. The other key takeaway that I want people to really appreciate, and my colleagues, and I hope SDPI can set up a workshop on this where we can engage more people like Mr. Parvez and others in more intimate detail. We used to think that technology solutions were about buying the technology, developing the process, and then telling people about it. And after 20 years, I think, of failed projects and suboptimal outcomes, we've understood that no, you have to engage the people first, then develop the processes, and then bring the technology on in that order. This is a critical piece that emerges from enterprise project management. And it doesn't matter if you use waterfall or agile or portfolio, and you can bring me whatever solution, whatever buzzword that is coming out of the business schools and the public sector. Until and unless you engage people first, you're not going to be successful. And then finally on this piece, get the project up and running as soon as possible. Not in its totality, but use pilots, sandbox environments, build something quickly that your users can see, and then build iteratively on top of that. So you get people excited and you get people using something, and you can keep pace with technology. So now let's move to the policy environment. What does this mean in terms of provincial, federal, and municipal government? At the federal level, really what has been happening with COVID is a lot of intelligence and analysis gathering. And that has really seen, at least in Canada, a tight alignment between what's been happening in Ottawa, within the provinces, as well as within the municipalities. All of the health practitioners have been in line. Why? Because they're all working from the same data sets. WHO is relevant once again, at least as far as the global north and the south are concerned, and the data that we're getting out of Johns Hopkins seems to be what everybody is following. So policy and strategic planning to make sure we can capture that data has been enabled by the federal government. And we also see the federal government using that data to target where subsidies and support are going. The province is now trying to get away from paper, put everything into digital platforms, which are easy for the public to actually access through mobile devices. At the municipalities, trying to engage the public more as part of the data collection. It's not just about city staff people on their own collecting data and deciding how services are going to be delivered. The public is very much a part of this and has been due to ICT and COVID. So in terms of policy enablement, at the federal level, and so far as COVID has been concerned, making data available for the public. What are the levels of cases that have been admitted into hospitals? Where are the hotspots? What is the fatality rate looking like? What is the R0 level looking like? All of these numbers have to be rolled up. In order for them to be rolled up, everybody has to be working from the same data. All of the information being gathered at the local level through ICT largely, increasingly from mobile and different decentralized health service providers, all has to match. Data integrity and accuracy has been critical. And then at the provincial level, this gets back to the G GIS component, the geospatial value of location has been paramount. Before, people would just throw maps around during election season. I'm sure everybody was following the US elections, and we watch CNN and how election maps are thrown up, and Haji Vaji bara zabardast kaam kiya CNN ne, bare map dikhaya hame, and you'd see who is winning and how polarized it is. But now, in actual administrative terms, we can see so many municipalities using mapping technology to target and focus on where COVID outbreaks have taken place. And I'll spend the last couple of minutes just talking about this. Resource maps have been used as part of service delivery to monitor the status of hospitals, homes for the aged, schools. How well are the treatment centers doing? Where are areas of outbreaks? Are cases being community spread, or are they sporadic? How many hospitalizations, new cases? All of these have been enabled by GIS-based ICT technology, and that's different reporters from different primary healthcare facilities feeding that knowledge back up and that data back into public health authorities. What has happened next? Emergency data and preparedness efforts have leveraged map-based technology. All emergency services across the city are using the same layer. So they all know where the outbreaks and the hotspots are and are able to mobilize resources. This is critical for developing countries like Pakistan and South Asia, where mobile technology can actually make up for the lack of service delivery capability by local providers. We know that municipalities are cash strapped in Karachi, in Lahore. If we have within the larger cities more mobile technology feeding into systems that gathers data for government, that gathers data for cities and is audited by the public, is available through open data through the public, you can actually start to see transformation take place. And the last slide I'll talk about is now the research piece. From a city perspective, geospatial technology has really allowed us to focus on different demographic groups, socioeconomic groups, the community makeup and ethnic groups where COVID has hit hardest. And Dr. Shaheen talked about this as well, that we've seen with COVID, it has really exposed the haves from the have-nots. The rich stay healthy, the sick stay poor, as the old saying goes, and the data has allowed us to focus on that and look at where access to resources such as testing and institutional support is needed. In the interest of time, I'll finish there, but the last piece in terms of the City of Toronto Public Health site, I could hopefully go through something like this, a walkthrough or a demo, maybe early on in the new year if the organizers are so interested. But do visit the City of Toronto Public Health website. You'll see a lot of very interesting uses of map technology to look at various healthcare service providers, municipal service delivery units, and all of that is driven by, it is all underpinned by GIS enabled ICT technology. So this is really moving forward in leaps and bounds. As Dr. Shaheen mentioned and Parvez Sahab alluded to, we've really been pushed into this space now. And as we see now the vaccines rolling out within the UK, they started today in Ontario. More and more scrutiny will be applied to who is getting these vaccines, how soon, how quickly, what the second strain and perhaps the second mutation of COVID will look like and what the response will be. It's certainly interesting times, Sartaj Sahab, that we live in. I'm delighted to be part of the knowledge sharing between Global North and Global South. And I'll stop there and hand it back to you, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, which clearly shows the distance Pakistan has to travel to go towards these goals and possibilities. So may I now call upon our last panelist, Dr. Adeela Rehman, to make presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my presentation. Thank you so much, SDPI, first of all, for giving me this opportunity to share students' experiences towards online teaching and learning. Right now, we are just talking about the institutions and how institution has developed online teaching and how we as a teacher or the instructors have incorporated our efforts, energies into developing online learning. But a student's perspective, as Dr. Faisal has rightly said, that unless and until we will not engage the particular community who are actually facing it, it may be not complete picture. So my paper is talking about the experiences of students towards prospects and challenges of using ICTs in online learning. I'm just going to brief about a background. It was, I think, March 12, 2020, when we were when we were going with the normal routine of our university, and immediately on the weekend we received a call that for Monday we do not have to come to the university. And immediately we thought about that, sure, what should we do now, because we do not want to collapse the system, we do not want to lag behind the students from the learning, and we do not want to take a break even, because otherwise if we take a break in semester, it may prolong the university's curriculum or the year for the students. So immediately we thought about the alternates. So when we were searching for different alternates, we came across with Zoom, we came across with Google Meet, and we came across with the different other kind of blended learning techniques. So as the globalization already altered many ways of technology, and we were using various kind of ICTs in our education system, such as multimedia, PowerPoint presentation, videos. But after COVID-19, it accelerated with the double pace that we need, and we have to incorporate various blend of learning while delivering online teaching. So my paper is reflecting on that particular blended learning which Fatima Islam Women University and which we adopted, as Dr. Shaheen Sardar also mentioned that the NAHI program was there, and from the support of HEC and our own institution, we adopted blended learning techniques. Before going into the experiences of the students, I'm just going to give a brief overview of blended learning. It is, although not a new concept, but with respect to online learning and using technology, and where we always use traditional kind of teaching, blended learning was a magnificent fusion for the face-to-face, as well as alternate for the face-to-face learning experiences. Blended learning is a term applied to the practice of providing instruction and learning experiences through some combination of both face-to-face and technology-mediated learning. During the technology-mediated components of these learning experiences, students are not required to be physically together in one place, which was actually during the pandemic was not possible, but may be connected digitally through online communities, which is the need of today's world after and during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. So when we adopt blended learning technique, it is actually an interface of human with technology. Obviously, without the intervention, motivation, personal feedback, listening, relevancy, and the disciplined human, it is not possible that we may adopt and we may use that technology. So that human motivation were there, the human expertise were there from the teacher's perspective as well as from the student's perspective, and we adopted certain kind of certain modes of technology. We have developed our structure through different tracking and control, just as HEC and NAHI has already mentioned, different kind of program they have established, self-study methods, and also the global reach out program with focusing on the how to give access to the remote areas students. There are three major models of blended learning: flipped classroom, blended block, and fully online incorporate synchronous learning. So we were actually adopted, and we are actually adopting and doing fully online mode. Flipped classroom, we use multiple techniques. I will not spend much time because otherwise I will lack my time in order to share whatever I want to share. So these are the in flipped classroom, you use videos, different parts of content we may put in the classroom. Student read it out and then give feedback. And the best way to access to those material is that you post in via email. You just post on the Google Classroom, or you just post different reading materials on the LMS or the CMS system. Students can read that material and then can give the feedback. And while having face-to-face interaction, they can learn more about and we can engage students through face-to-face interaction. In a blended block model, is an intensive face-to-face session as a 1 day or half day, and then weekly or online tutorial or activities have been given to the student, and students perform those activities and then send back to those activities to the instructors on through online medium. But in fully online, just we are talking about face-to-face, is a short lecture podcast within a limited time period. We deliver online, we interact online as a real time. Online resources and learning activities have been shared, online tutorials have been given, and the interaction have been built up with the students via online collaboration, discussion forums, and group work or group activities are also performed on the Zoom or Google Meet in a real-time situation. So now the question arises that various literature also indicated that technology is important. Technology, within that technology, LMS, Google Meet, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, we can use in enhancing our learning. So the question arises that although the technology is there, system is in place, but what are the perspective of students towards technology-oriented teaching methodologies? Because I think they are the real stakeholders. We maybe have some access because of that we belong to certain institutions, and institutions are providing us the facilities, but the students are paying from their own pocket. So their perspective, their technical problems, their technical competencies is important to be taken to be under consideration. So while knowing the experiences, of the students, I have conducted mixed research design, in which I have conducted online survey from 110 university students. I just developed an Google form and posted on different social media sites. Different students belongs to different universities, whoever had approached that survey had filled that survey, and some interviews personal interviews were conducted from the students to know their qualitative perspective or in-depth analysis with respect to online teaching. This is the demographic characteristics of the students. There were 60% were female versus 40% were male students over there. Mostly were undergraduate students, but there were some postgraduate students who were doing MPhil and PhD in various public and private universities in Pakistan. Most of the students, 62.4%, were belong to the social sciences field, because I belong to social sciences field. So maybe that was the reason, because I had more connection in the social sciences field. So therefore, the students were also majority number from social sciences discipline. So coming towards the results, the trends and experiences of online education, which actually the students reported that they were happy with the use of Google Meet and Google Classroom. The average mean for all the variables indicated that they are satisfied with the blend of learning, in which we are interacting in real time, as well as we are using different videos, recording online lectures, typewritten assignments, use of assistive technology for lectures, and PowerPoint presentation by using by the faculty members. So these were the trends actually we adopted, and the experiences of the students were also showing a positive trends, and they adopted these technologies efficiently. These are some of the glimpses of my own classes. We have developed our own classes for each course on the Google Classroom. Initially, we have started video lectures, but after that, we just switched to the video lecture. Initially, we started, but after that, we switched to the audio lectures only because of some cybercrime or the security issues. So these are the different real-time pictures where we engaged students, particularly for the online classes. The question arises about the quality of technology-oriented teaching methodology. That is still a big question mark, and I think for the quality enhancement cell and for the HEC, it still we have to work on that we have to measure the quality parameters by delivering online teaching. With respect to student experiences, yes, They were happy. Majority of they feel that the quality of teaching methodology were used and teacher were competent. With respect to teacher competence, the average student rated 3 to 4 points to the student's competences, and that student competences is again reflected on the institutional policy, because Fatma Islam University has also developed a rigorous, has also given a rigorous training to the faculty members, and we have developed our own online education system, which is also available on our website. So teacher competencies not only depend on the teacher own individual, it is the institutional effort as well as the HEC efforts to educate or to give the training to the faculty members. When we correlate the methodology and teaching methods with the students' learning, so whenever we adopt good blended technology and teacher competence enhance student learning as well. With respect to student learning and experiences, I think and believe that because of using these ICTs and the number of varieties of ways students were able to develop their assignments and projects more creatively, artistically, and obviously by using different kind of gadgets, ICT tools, I think they become more creative now as compared to the traditional mode of teaching where they just learn and they write by hand and they just do the assignments and projects handwritten. Now they are very much competent in using various kinds of methods and ICTs tools. The qualitative aspect of student feedbacks were like that they were happy to interact, have a face-to-face interaction despite having we're not able to meet physically, but they were happy at least we have a live interaction with the faculty member. But apart from all these experiences, there were certain challenges, and that the connectivity power shortage was there, particularly in my department. Majority of the students were belong to Gilgit-Baltistan, and this is one of my students' real-time pictures. She was taking class outside her home in the GB, where the mountain, you can also see the mountains. They just go outside the home in the mountains, and wherever they find signals, they sit over there and take the classes. And that was the peak summertime. She was taking umbrella and she was taking classes. So that was the connectivity and power shortage. It's still a problem. It is not resolved yet, although it is overcome by the efforts of HEC and by the efforts of Gilgit-Baltistan own community. But still the power shortage even in urban cities, urban areas, these are the real life challenges with students day to day time they are communicating. Just like a screenshot I've shared, many students just share the screens on WhatsApp that we are unable to connect, we are missing the lectures, we are unable to hear. So these are the still challenges which we need to address in policy, and we have to give equitable resources, particularly for the female, because in our university, most of the girls are female, and during the exam time period, because exams were also online, our girls suffered a lot because of the cultural constraint. They cannot go to the cafeteria, internet cafe, and they do not go outside alone. So that was the cultural constraint which actually we have to think about when we design policy for the female perspective. We need to incorporate particularly. Learner center is also there. If there is no support by the students, maybe we were not able to even communicate. Yes, for the overcoming of the issues, we adopted YouTube technology because in GB Baltistan, in Gilgit Baltistan and GB students, they can only access the to the YouTube. So what we did that we converted our live interactive videos into the YouTube and then just shared the YouTube link because YouTube open at 1G or 4G and 2G. So then they were able to get at least the lectures. So in that context, teacher competence were there, and we have integrated technology with the blended course content. So the conclusion is that yes, despite having all these challenges, technology played a very important role, and with the help of ICTs, we developed an online teaching, and we adopted, we incorporated, we implemented successfully, and now we are doing this online teaching. The policy recommendation is that we need to develop a comprehensive system, including blended learning methodology, and equitable access to ICT must be there, particularly for the remote education, remote areas, and particularly for the female. Furthermore, policy dialogue is recommended to adopt and practice blended technology-based learning methodology at all levels of education to meet the current challenges of education system. When we talked about all level of education, so it must be started, that means it must be started in the schools as well as college and then at the university level. So although we have achieved a lot and we are happy and with the online teaching learning, at least we have not wasted our time. Still, training for teachers in using in-person activities and technology and creating the right blend of activities for deep, meaningful learning is required. Opportunities for students to adjust to the online learning environment is also recommended or required. In strategic planning of the universities, the blended learning should be well defined and highlighted. With this, thank you so much from my side.
Well, thank you very much for a very useful presentation and specific recommendations. So to conclude these presentations, as you have heard, we have not only, the four very excellent presentations have ended up with their respective recommendation in those sectors or those subsectors. In my view, if we have to round out all these to meet the challenges of the post-COVID world in the coming years, what we need is a national plan for what I will call digital transformation. And this plan, of course, has to be formulated by the government along with the private sector, which means service providers, etc., as well as the education and health sectors where their prevalence is much more. Now, it will obviously have many elements, but I want to identify at least four of them. One, and the most urgent one, is to upgrade the IT infrastructure. As Mr. Parvez Iftikhar pointed out, Pakistan is very much underdeveloped in terms of IT infrastructure and fiber optic connectivity. And therefore, what we need is a very quick action to upgrade this infrastructure. And for this purpose, the plan should provide goals, targets, policies, cost estimate for 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years, so that it can be monitored to what extent these and the issues, as Parvez has pointed out, are very serious because the investment requirements are large and the whole issues are not easy to resolve because of the investment required, etc. But they have to be addressed, otherwise we'll fall behind. The second dimension of this national plan would be to bridge that digital divide. And both our speakers, Dr. Shaheen, Sardar and Adeela Rehman, also have pointed out different kinds of digital divides, which are urban and rural areas, as well as the gender-based divide. So therefore, we have to cover this divide. And for this purpose, I think some policy decisions will also be required, first of all, on taxation side. We must reduce all taxes and duties on all IT services and products to be able to access, otherwise the people will not be able to afford it. The third element is to pay special attention to those sectors where the revival of activity to the pre-COVID level is not likely in the near future. There are some activities which will slightly get revived, but a large number of activities like air travel, urban transport, sports, tourism, etc., some cultural activities will not in the foreseeable future come back to the same level. But there, the physical connectivity can be replaced by digital connectivity, but that will require very innovative solutions and different business models, innovative use of space, and so many others. So as a part of this plan, there should be subsectors which will pay attention to groups, to these sectors where the activity will not revive and unemployment will be difficult to resolve unless we come up with these respective solutions. So this also, and I think Faisal Shaheen has presented some very interesting ideas in this context to what extent and at different levels of action at local level, municipal level, as well as provincial level and national level, we are going to do so. The fourth element of this is, of course, IT education. And it has got to start from massive crash program for computer literacy. In fact, cell phone is a very good device to promote computer literacy even among semi-educated people. But then going beyond that, we would need literacy among students and all kinds of other segments of population if they have to catch up. But then we need at the higher level centers of excellence, which will provide human resources in advanced fields like artificial intelligence and other advanced uses if we have to catch up. Now, once we expand our educational services, let's not forget that in the coming years, there'll be very intense competition among countries to attract talent because so we don't want the experience that we have now. Our students, the best students do A and O level and they go abroad on scholarships and never come back to the country. So we don't want to train more IT people only to lose them to other countries. So we have to have attractive incentives for people to stay on. Even countries like Thailand are competing now by declaring themselves as a corona-free country. Health facilities which are free are subsidized so that people are attracted to go there. So there are all kinds of incentives that are required if you want to retain our people there. And similarly, I think in terms of travel, for example, in 2019, 1.5 billion people traveled. And in this year, it's gone down to 10%. So how much it will revive and what will happen to those particular segments and sectors which are affected by this. So to sum up, therefore, I hope that the task force, which Iftikhar is a member, will work on this kind of a thing and on a crash basis, because it's not something which we can do in sequence. We need action on all these things simultaneously because they are mutually reinforcing and they can gather momentum. So we have a lot of catching up to do, unfortunately, but as speakers have pointed out, the COVID-19 is pushed us into the 21st century and therefore forced us to take advantage of these opportunities. But this requires very concerted action between the government at the higher level, provincial level, and at the local level, as well as all the private sector, because I am convinced that our youth and our experts have enough potential to take full advantage of these opportunities if we provide them the wherewithal and the infrastructure as well as the education and incentives that are required. So I hope that this panel agrees with this set of recommendations. So that concludes my comments, and we have 10 minutes for questions if the audience wants to ask any questions from any panel member. Brigadier Saab, open the floor to questions.
The questions? We have a few questions, but I think we do not have time, sir, for these questions to be answered. What we will do, we will post these questions to those who have asked these questions. I would request about 7 minutes so that I can share the recommendations that we prepared, so that the audience know what recommendations we are going to put across to the policymakers, including yours.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so these are some of the recommendations that we have gathered, and we will share these recommendations with the policymakers as well as the stakeholders. We also add to these recommendations the recommendations now that have been made by the chair. First, face-to-face teaching in our institutions of higher education is of uneven quality, and the evaluation and assessment process remains subjective and unaccountable. The mode of teaching by reading notes prepared years ago with pedagogical approach discourage interactive learning, critical thinking, and meaningful engagement. Students prefer to attend just sufficient number of classes to sit for examinations. We need to plan and take comprehensive steps to overhaul our education system to meet the challenges of pandemics like COVID-19. Next, online teaching is now the new normal, and we have to ensure that it is homogeneous, well-developed, and there is online readiness of teachers and course materials. High-level committees should be constituted for reviewing and providing online readiness certification for each course. A guidance and complaint committee is also the need of the hour. Every university must have functional, operational, accessible, and live learning management systems with all requisite information. The students must have all the information regarding the course content, delivery, and assessment prior to the start of their course. The faculty must have the training and confidence to share their curriculum content, and while the students without fear of losing authority and ownership of their work. COVID-19 pandemic has altered the traditional teaching methods, forcing academic institutions to adopt e-learning. However, because of the problem of internet connectivity and availability, students faced serious problems in unserved and underserved areas, and they could not benefit from online learning. It is therefore essential that equitable and universal access to the internet be ensured. Blended technology, which is a fusion of face-to-face and online learning, has emerged as a good solution to address the needs of education institutions. Therefore, the adoption of blended learning techniques should be facilitated to meet the challenges of education in such exigencies. To meet the challenges of current and future educational needs in such situations, the adoption of blended technology will not only enable the academic institutions to continue their activities, it would also reduce costs, increase flexibility, and enhance students' access to multiple sources of education. The demand of students for quality education is a challenge for teachers and educational institutions. Let us seize the moment and join the perseverance for a better Pakistan and the world. Next, if ever there were doubts about the criticality of high-speed broadband internet for the nation, the horrific COVID-19 has laid such thoughts to rest. Unfortunately, the broadband internet penetration in Pakistan is under 40%, and for 4G it is only 25%, and that too of poor quality, especially in smaller cities and towns, mainly because of constraints in the backbone networks. Alarmingly, Pakistan ranks below all its neighbors except Afghanistan in almost every international ICT index. Our broadband infrastructure is mostly wireless, but as globally recognized, it is the optic fibers that can provide high speed, best quality, reliable medium for data transfer. But since the required investment is too high for individual service providers, it is imperative that passive optic network should be laid in tier 2 and tier 3 cities that several service providers may use for delivering broadband. Passive optic fiber network should be laid under public-private partnership programs. Licensed telecom infrastructure providers should be incentivized to lay such passive infrastructures and rent those out to the fixed and mobile service providers. Efforts should also be made to create demand by targeting schools and other academic institutions, healthcare facilities, and public organizations to further motivate the investors, both the infrastructure providers as well as the service providers. The government should promote public-private partnership for these investments. The funding can come from annual budget or from the organizations like the World Bank. The federal government should, through intelligence gathering and multi-stakeholder analysis, advise large public organizations on data management solutions, mobile as well as GIS integration, based on better practices from other jurisdictions. For critical services, the government should provide wage subsidies, tax exemptions, and grace periods on payments to ensure continuity and cash flow and service delivery. The provincial government should leverage digital ICT GIS technologies and applications where possible. The urban units in Punjab has shown promise in this regard. As a result, the province should extend data analysis, planning and budgetary support directly to municipal service providers, bypassing bureaucratic inertia and inefficient process. Municipal departments must be enabled to transform citizens' experiences with service delivery by supporting remote access and safe support for frontline workers. Work with non-state actors should also be encouraged to secure and take advantage of innovative environment while ensuring uninterrupted services during COVID-19 like pandemics. At the end, sir, before I hand over to you, I sincerely thank all the panelists and you, sir, for sparing time and being with us. You know, it has been an enlightening experience to be hearing such speakers on a subject like this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I also wish to join you in thanking all the panel members. And I think it's a very positive and useful conclusion for merging these recommendations.
Sir, आपका speaker off है.
एक minute.
Ji on है, sir. Speaker is on.
Yeah.
You are audible,
So
sir.
I was saying that I want to also thank the panel. It has been a very useful presentations, and I think the recommendations that emerged from it have been very well presented, and I've rounded them off by calling them a national plan for digital transformation, and which I think is not only a recommendation from this panel, but I think the conference as a whole, because ITC covers probably all the other branches. So I hope with these words, we can conclude in time, 1 minute to spare. And I hope all the speakers will take note of the questions that have been addressed. Unfortunately, we didn't get time to answer them here, and through email or other means, the questions will be answered.
And thank you for the IT team, and thank you IT team for such a good work. It has gone very well, and I also thank Hassan, Murtaza, and Shahid, Minhas, and also Adnan, Umar, and everybody that was involved.